Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As always, on the fourth Wednesday of the month, I'm joined by Mark LaBarr, conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. And today we're going to talk about what birds we might see as fall migration gets underway. Great to see you again.
Always great to be here.
So we're in September, and migration's in full swing. What are we seeing out there now?
Well, it is. It is time for things to move through. We're kind of in the middle of things. We have some migration that happens early, in late August. A lot of our shorebirds move through. Now we've got hawk and warbler migrations and other songbirds, and a little bit later on we might pick up some of the waterfowl stuff. So we're right at the height of it. And it's funny because we think of migration as kind of a north to south thing here, which is the bulk of it in Vermont. But I was talking to somebody from Washington State, and they were talking about I'm not going to be able. Going from high up on a mountain down low. That word's just not going to come out today. And there are chickadees out there that move from upper elevations to lower elevations this time of year. So you can have that migration from, some of those colder climes down to something that's a little bit more favorable. Here, we're talking a lot about, hawk migration and some of the raptors that are pushing through. And so it's a good time for people to get out and sometimes just look up, and you can see a lot of things passing by. My kids play soccer down at Mount Abraham, down in Bristol, and that's a great place to watch turkey vultures. In fact, I was at the open house the other night, and one of the kids was saying, one of the adults actually was saying to the kids, they should be the vultures instead of the eagles, because Bristol sits right up against that first run of green mountains. You get pushes from the north and the west that give these lifts of air, and the vultures come in, and you can see them by the dozen as I'm watching my kids play soccer. This is a type of soaring that the birds take advantage of, as well as lift that they get from the ground that gets heated.
Well, speaking of vultures, I have a question and a picture from Cheryl Colburn of West Wardsboro, and she writes, "Can you please help me identify this bird?"
I always love those questions. Very straight, simple. And this is another one which is an interesting bird, and I actually saw 4 of these in Middlebury. This is a black vulture. In that last picture you saw that the turkey vulture had a red head. And the black vulture, as you can see, has a black head. Now, this is a southern species. We see them occasionally here in Vermont, and I just happened, when I saw the ones where I was in Middlebury, and I was with some folks from the Otter Creek Audubon, and we looked up, and there were 4 of them that were flying over. So as much as you may see the bulk of the vultures that you're going to see are turkey vultures here moving along, keep your eyes out for black vultures. They have really short wedge-shaped tails, and again, that dark head as opposed to the black head.
And so what other birds have we seen in migration recently?
Well, like I said earlier this year, things are moving through. We had probably the big thing that people have been out there watching is for common nighthawks. And this is it's in a group of birds known as the goat suckers. It is an aerial forager. In other words, it flies around. It's kind of like it's a relative of the whippoorwill. You can see those nice white patches that are on that wing, which really signify that bird.
Yeah, very distinctive.
This is a bird that's endangered in Vermont. We haven't seen them nesting here, but obviously they're nesting somewhere else, because down in Westminster Station along the Connecticut River, they had a peak count of 3,624 nighthawks on just one evening.
It sounds like a lot.
Yeah, and then they had a total for the entire season of more than 8,000.
Wow.
So just an amazing amount of birds that are moving down using the Connecticut River as a means of traveling and foraging.
And you have another picture you want to show us,
Yeah,
too?
and this one just came up. This is an American golden plover. I put this on here because a golden plover was seen by hawk watchers on Mount Philo. So, of course, you're out there, you're looking for raptors and hawks, but you never know what might go by. So this is a shorebird that was using Lake Champlain or migrating through Lake Champlain. And so just kind of an oddity that the hawk watchers pulled up. So all sorts of things moving.
Let's talk more about raptors. What else have we seen?
And I try to touch on this every year. This is a great time to see big pushes of raptors through, especially broad-winged hawks. Broad-winged hawks are probably the most plentiful migrant raptor that hawk watchers see. They move throughout Vermont, but quite a bit along the Champlain Valley. Here's a shot of one. You can see those big stripes on the tail. This is a buteo, so big fat wings, short tail. But those broad stripes, tell you it's a broadwing. And again, just like that turkey vulture, they use the air that's being lifted up that warms and then lifts up, as well as winds from the north to push them along. And so oftentimes we'll see these birds in the middle of the day because that's when the greatest warming comes, here in the valley. And you combine that with some north winds and you get what are called kettles. And these are basically updrafts, or huge numbers of broadwings and some other raptors taking advantage of these updrafts, and they circle up, they gain altitude, and then they'll ride that back down and circle up again. So they're basically using as least amount of energy as they can to slowly move themselves down the Champlain Valley.
So instead of just flying straight, they just ride the current.
Yes, they're taking advantage of that. They're surfing, yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. And we have folks that go out regularly this time of year. A lot of the Audubon members, birders that are out there, really dedicated citizen scientists that get out there, collect this data, and record it for us. And for instance, Putney Mountain down just south of Westminster Station in the Connecticut River Valley, in the middle of September this year, had more than 2,300 birds, raptors that came through. And so again, a dedicated crew that's up there keeping an eye on a daily basis for these big pushes. Now, most of those were kettles of broadwings that were moving along, groups of 500 thereabouts that they were seeing. But you get a bunch of different birds that are mixed in with that as well. On the western side of the state, Mount Philo, they had a big day right now in the middle of September of just over 900 and close to 950 birds that moved through.
Really?
So, and again, even with these nighthawk counts, right? There's a fellow by the name of Don Clark who does these counts down in the Connecticut River Valley. And then there's, again, I mentioned these hosts of citizen science. Without them being out there on a regular basis and collecting this data, we really wouldn't know how these birds move through. So kudos to all them that put the time and energy into doing the counting a lot. There's a lot of birds to count.
It's a lot.
It is.
So along with the kettles, are there any other distinctive characteristics that we can look for?
Yeah, when you're looking up, and that's what you do a lot of times when you're hawk watching or you're looking out at a distance. Certainly size comes into factor. One of the bigger migrants, or biggest, would be the bald eagle that often comes through. Here's a picture of an adult bald eagle, the classic white head and tail. Now, you may not see that white head and tail in immatures, but just the size and the straightness of the wing can be really indicative of a bald eagle. Another bird that has some size and has some weight on it too, so sometimes can be confusing with that white head, is the osprey. But you can see here, unlike the bald eagle, this osprey has a kind of a kinked wing there. So instead of having that straight edge, by looking up and seeing that kinked wing and that really white body, you can tell that it's an osprey moving through.
Now, what about some of the smaller raptors?
So those are the tougher ones. Sometimes they come by really quick. They're not necessarily kettling, so they're moving fast. And so some of the smaller ones, like our accipiters. Here's a sharp-shinned hawk. You can see, unlike the buteos, like the broadwing, which had that, fat tail, this has got kind of that narrow-shaped tail, and this is a bird of our woodlands. We've talked about them before.
Yep, we've had them in our yard.
Yep, and you've got that really straight tail edge. A bird that would be similar to this would be a Cooper's hawk, which has a rounded tail. So this is a bird that will come through, and oftentimes comes through fast, like the next bird that we're going to look at. So this is a falcon. This is our kestrel. And again, you can see it has that long tail feature, but it has that very pointed wing shape. So much different than some of the Sharpies and the Coopers that are out there. This, along with peregrine falcons, would be the two falcon species that you would probably see moving through with a lot of these hawks.
Any other common species you might see?
Well, you know, towards the end of the migration, once we get into October, although they're moving through now and people, I see them all over the place as I'm driving around, is the red-tailed hawk. And this is a pretty common bird for us.
And they actually stick around too.
They do. They'll stay through the winter. And you know, you see that again, a buteo shape, big fat wings, big fat tail. This is a bird that'll move through a little bit later in the season. And another one that, you know, funny, when I've been up to Philo, oftentimes you see this from the top as opposed to underneath it. This is a harrier or a marsh hawk, and that white rump really shines there and lets you know.
Now, is that a female? Because the males are gray, right?
The males are gray, you're right. And so that is, or a younger bird. And they kind of rock back and forth with that V shape, and oftentimes you see them over grasslands, which is a primary habitat for them.
Okay, looks like we have time for some more viewer mail. Here's a question from Peggy Brown of Hyde Park. And she says, Mark, I enjoy watching you on Bird Notes. As you've mentioned many times, warbler identification can be tricky. They're also difficult to photograph because they do move quickly. However, I'm sending along 4 photos that I managed to take, 2 of each bird, and hoping that you can help identify these for me. I tried my bird books, but again, they're not easy to correctly identify.
Yeah, and you know, the warblers, they're an entire show themselves.
Right.
So they are somewhat difficult. Here's one of the pictures that Peggy had sent in. Yeah, it is, and it's amazing the pictures that we're seeing now as the camera technology really advances, and even people shooting with their phones. So this is actually a Blackburn Ian Warbler, and I wish I had a picture. I should have put one in of what the Blackburn Ian looks like in the springtime, but it is bright orange.
Bright orange?
Yes, so all of that area there that you'll see with yellow, if you have a male, is this real distinctive bright orange. And you can see how they molt into this molt pattern, this winter plumage, which is much drabber, making them really difficult to identify. The wing bars are a big clue on this, and the yellow all around that kind of facial pattern is another one that tells us this is a Blackburn Ian. And then the other one that she had, this is a common yellowthroat. So a species that we see, you know, still flitting around marshy areas. The male has a black mask, and this is just kind of a little drab brown bird that's moving through. So,
any other species that you want to mention?
Yeah, you know, I got lucky. As I've mentioned in the past, one of the things that I do at Audubon is I band birds. You've been down to the banding station.
Yes, I have.
And so I've banded a lot of birds all over the place. And I just happened to be running nets over in Charlotte and came across a bird that I don't see a lot. So it's very exciting. You know, when you're banding birds, especially in the fall, you never know what's going to be in the nets. And so I just happened to walk over, and we had a Wilson's warbler. Now, the Wilson's warbler is a warbler of the north. We don't have them here.
So he was just moving through?
Just moving through. And it's a bird that I've handled 3-4 times in my life. And so this was a really great bird for me to have in the net. But another example of lots of different things that are moving through right now, and folks that are out there just keep their eyes open.
And speaking of being on the move, I noticed it's my hummingbird feeder is very quiet. Should I take it in?
No,
Are they gone?
No. They're you know, there might be a few stragglers coming through. We're getting towards the tail end of things. We get calls like this all the time. You know, the food source that you put out there is not going to keep them from continuing to migrate south. They'll take advantage of that food source as they move through. I believe, and I'd need to check on this, the beginning of October is where we kind of see the end of that hummingbird push. But my guess is, you know, the bulk of them have passed, but still worth keeping out there, and of course keeping clean, even though the birds aren't using it. You want to make sure, you know, we've had some hot weather here in September, and so you want to make sure that if you do have that food out there, that the food is in good shape for any birds that might take advantage of it.
Right, and keep your bird baths filled too.
Keep your bird baths filled, and start thinking about filling your bird feeders.
Yeah, when should people put feeders out?
You know, it's interesting because of the mild winter we had last year.
Right.
You know, that the timing has become difficult. We've always said October, November, and last year it was pushed back because it was so warm, and folks in bear country, you know, bears were still active. So Vermont Fish and Wildlife had asked folks to hold off on putting out feeders until much later than what we usually recommend. But that time will be coming soon. All
right. Well, if you have a question for Mark, you can write to him at Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington. The zip code is 05462. You can also email Mark. His email address is mlabarr@audubon.org. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.